In 2013, the Lozano family, who consisted of Dad Ernest, Mum Corrine, 15-year-old Flora, 11-year-old Gabby, and 5-year-old son Robbie, were living in the Calgary neighbourhood of Evanston. Ernest and Corrine had immigrated from the Philippines a number of years before and were hardworking and had been saving money to sponsor some other family members to also join them here in Canada. The process of immigrating from the Philippines is very expensive, so in many cases, a single family member will come over and then send money back home to bring other members of their families as the fastest option. Since the 1970s, overpopulation and economic and political issues in the Philippines increased greatly immigration from the Philippines to major cities in Canada, particularly Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton. The education system in the Philippines meant that the majority of new citizens were well educated and proficient in English. By 1992, the Philippines was the second most important country of origin for Canada and has stayed that way until current day. The family reunification program enables many families to bring over their children and parents with them. There is also a live in caregiver program, and Filipinos have consistently ranked first in the independent immigrants category, a group selected on the basis of skills and the ability to contribute quickly to Canadian society and the economy. The Lanzanos has also been able to bring Ernest's parents over, and they were living with them. In 2008, Ernest sponsored his 22-year-old cousin Wilson C., whose last name I have to redact in order to protect the privacy of the victims, to come to Canada under the live-in caretaker program. He came to live with the Lanzano family in their home to take care of their children so that Ernest and Corrine could work full-time saving money on daycare costs, which anyone with kids knows here in Alberta is expensive, especially if you have more than one child, in which case one parent is almost forced to stay at home due to how much money you would have to make to even break even. At the time, Flora was 10, Gabby was 8, and Robbie was just an infant. Wilson and Ernest were close, and Wilson was named as Robbie's godfather. Ernest and Corrine had a full household with them, 3 kids, Wilson and Ernest's parents, Francis and Clement, all living under one roof. In late 2011, Wilson was able to secure his citizenship and had gotten a job outside of the Lanzano home and moved out, but moved just down the block and in with Ernest's sister Emma and Jay de Guzman, who lived nearby. So the household was always busy and noisy and full of laughter and celebrations. Corrine was described as the rope that held the family together, and Robbie's smile could always be counted on to wash away the longest and hardest days that Ernest had. Around lunchtime on Thursday, May 13th, 2013, Ernest's father, Clement, swings by the house and sees that the garage door is up, which he notes as odd because there were no cars parked in it. As he walks into the garage and towards the door that leads into the kitchen, his heart starts to beat a little faster. There is blood on the floor in front of the door and on the doorknob. He opens the door and sees more blood in the kitchen. Then he spots Corrine. She's laying in the middle of the kitchen, face down, surrounded in bloody puddles. He reaches for her wrist to feel for a pulse and doesn't find one. He then remembers that Robbie would be home and races up the stairs towards the bedrooms, noting on the way that the carpet on the stairs was also covered in bloodstains. Robbie was laying at the foot of his parents' bed. There were 4 distinct stab wounds showing through his yellow tank top, and beneath him were pools of blood. Grief-stricken, panicked, and distraught, he's unable to find a phone and runs next door to the neighbors who call 911. Jay and Emma arrive and the neighbor directs them to stay outside. When Ernest arrives, they weren't able to restrain him and he ran inside to discover the grisly scene of his wife and young son dead. When the police arrive, Ernest tells them that his wife's car, a 2005 Acura, is missing from the garage and the house appears to have undergone a bit of a tossing with some furniture overturned, but nothing appeared to be missing other than the car. When questioned, Jay tells police that he sent Clement over to the house to check on things because he had received a number of texts and a phone call from Wilson, who, remember, is Ernest's cousin. His first text read, "I can't handle this anymore." Wilson then called Jay and he mentioned that he was in Ernest and Corrine's house, which was odd because Jay thought he should have been at work at the electronics store where he was working. He sounded scared and was asking Jay to help him. His last words before hanging up were, "Someone got stabbed." Police were able to track down the stolen Acura with Wilson in it near the town of Olds, which is about 95 kilometers outside of Calgary. He had gotten himself stuck in a ditch and appeared to be under the influence of something. His hands had sustained some injuries, and he was taken to the hospital to be treated and then arrested and detained for questioning. Wilson told the officers that he had arrived at the house to find a man attacking Corrine and Robbie and was trying to fend him off and called Jay for help. However, the blood evidence left at the scene and in the stolen Acura led directly back to Wilson and only Wilson. A search warrant was executed on the room that he occupied in the de Guzman's house, and what they found on a series of videotapes told the story of a man with a secret and provided a clue as to the motive why he had killed his cousin's wife and his own godson. Wilson had come to Canada on a caregiver's visa when he was 22. He came to live with Ernest and his family and was taking care of their 3 kids. What Ernest and Corrine and everyone else for that matter didn't know was that, well, there were 2 things that they didn't know. Number 1, that Wilson liked to partake of methamphetamines for recreational purposes. And if you listen to my family's story about Dustin, you know my feelings about that. And number 2, shortly after he arrived in Canada, he took a liking to 11-year-old Flora, Ernest and Corrine's daughter. He started a sexual relationship, which I guess you can't really call it a relationship, with Flora when she was 11, which continued until May of 2013. He manipulated Flora and told her to keep their relationship a secret, often videotaping their sexual encounters. By May of 2013, Flora, who was now 15, was 6 months pregnant. Flora had been fooled into believing that Wilson and her were in love, and they had discussed their plans to be together after the baby was born. No one in the family nor any of her school friends knew that Flora was pregnant. Pressure on Wilson was starting to mount. He owed money to his drug dealer, his 15-year-old victim that he considered to be his girlfriend, but seeing that he was 26, the term girlfriend cannot be used here. She is also technically related to him and the daughter of the family that sponsored him to come to Canada and trusted him to watch over and protect their children. He had been fed and clothed by the Lozanos and had repaid them by impregnating and sexually abusing their eldest daughter. And Wilson was growing concerned that Corrine was soon to find out his secrets. Wilson came into the house in Evanston at around 10 a.m. on the morning of May 16th, let himself in with a key that he had gotten from Flora. There is no evidence that Flora had any idea what Wilson's plans were. He found Corrine in the kitchen washing up. Little 5-year-old Robbie was watching cartoons in the living room. And without any confrontation from Corrine, who trusted Wilson and didn't even question why or how he had gotten in, he stabbed her viciously in the back several times, leaving her to die on the kitchen floor. Robbie, who had seen his mother be attacked and watched as his former babysitter stabbed her repeatedly, made a run for it up the stairs. Wilson grabbed him at the top of the stairs. We can only imagine the terror the poor little guy was feeling. He managed to struggle his way free and made it to his parents' bedroom, where he tried ineffectively to ward off Wilson with a wooden back scratcher, the image of which still haunts me. Wilson pinned him down, cutting him on the arm, chest, and shoulder area before ultimately stabbing him 4 times in the back. He then strew a few things about to make it look like there had been a struggle and called his drug dealer, to whom he owed money, and asked him to come to the house, hoping that he would be there when the police or Jay arrived, pinning him to the crime. Ernest's father, Clement, beat him to the house to discover the grisly scene that he had left in his wake. Wilson C. was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, 1 count of second, as well as the sexual touching of a minor. There is no information on Flora, whether she went on to keep the baby that Wilson had impregnated her with, and how she is struggling with the unknowing role that she played in what led to the murder of her mom and brother. I do hope that she has received intensive and very good counseling to heal from the sexual abuse, grief and loss, and the feelings of guilt that she has to endure through absolutely no fault of her own. So please don't put any comments below about her role other than as an innocent victim. A jury trial was scheduled to start on April 7, 2015 for the murder of Robbie and Corrine, to be followed by a November trial for the sexual contact charge. But he decided to plead guilty at the 0 hour. And Justice Christine Edsvik was to reside. Carla McPhail was the Crown prosecutor, and Kim Ross was his taxpayer-funded defense lawyer, who described this case as one of the most difficult of his career. Wilson was originally sentenced to 2 life sentences and parole ineligibility of 35 years, which has since been reduced to 25 years due to the May 2022 Supreme Court of Canada decision that stacked parole ineligibility periods are unconstitutional and amount to cruel and unduly harsh sentences because the life sentences that the victim's family serve is somehow less cruel, and other arguments it's best not to get me started on.